Welcome to Burning Platforms, a podcast about the politics of technology from the Australia Institute's Centre for Responsible Technology. I'm Peter Lewis. This week, our regular panellists, Digital Rights Watch Chair Lizzie O'Shea and Health Engine CEO Dan Stinton, are joined by our special guest, the self-professed emotionally intelligent machine learning tool Pi AI. It's a very different sort of discussion, which we hope you enjoy. G'day, Lizzie.
Hi, Pete.
And Dan Stinton, now the CEO of Health Engine, coming to us from Perth. G'day, Dan.
G'day, Peter. G'day, Lizzie.
How's the new job?
The new job is all-consuming. But I'm in day 10 today. So just drinking from the veritable fire hose of information, trying to come up to speed on an industry that I know a little bit about because my family's involved with it, but I've never worked in.
Yeah, so just for regular listeners that wondered where Dan had gone, he has left the wonderful Guardian Australia after their 10th anniversary, is moving into health, which is a really interesting area around the way that businesses are emerging in the digital world. I'm sure you're going to bring a lot of the things you learned around media into that area. Is there anything that sort of struck you immediately as, oh, I didn't expect that?
Yeah, there's a few things I didn't expect, I think it's fair to say. But look, I think that the potential of this business is it really can draw on the best of the internet in that it can it is already a really efficient way for Australians to connect with their health providers, primarily GP and dental, but it also expands across all the allied groups, physio, chiro, and the like. And it does make it really easy for patients effectively to get care that they need in a much more easy and efficient way. There's also a really significant telehealth and online health component to this, which draws on the benefits that we've particularly learned during the pandemic. So it's a really exciting business. And there's opportunities, I think, for us to also be able to perhaps do a better job than what the government has done with My Health Record historically, and make it again easier for patients to use their own health records and their own data to share that with their health practitioners, and hopefully we can crack that in time as well.
Right. Well, we don't have a special guest this week. Everyone stood us up, but we do. This is a stunt, and I think it could be potentially lame, but we are going to have Pi, the new personal intelligence engine that's being created by Mustafa Suleiman, as our special guest, and we're going to be asking Pi some questions during the course of the discussion. I only came across this over the last couple of weeks listening to some of the wall-to-wall media around Mustafa's book, The Coming Wave, which looks really interesting. He's one of those tech bros with a conscience who has created a machine learning engine, is now going, oh my God, what's the world going to do with my invention? So that's going to be interesting. In fact, I just asked Pi, what are the challenges around health data? Health data is incredibly sensitive and personal, and there are several challenges that come with it: consent and privacy, accuracy and bias, security and privacy breaches, and interoperability. Fair enough. It sounds sort of what ChatGTP would tell us. The thing with PI, Lizzie, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, is that it's being put forward as an emotionally intelligent AI. You've been playing around with Pi a little bit as well. Did you find much emotional resonance and connection there?
Yeah, I have been playing around with it. I just, of course, spent my time trying to catch it out doing something bad, which I think is what everybody does when they first go onto these chatbots. I find it very anodyne. Like, it's often saying to me, oh, there's good and bad things about this thing. What do you think? And I feel deeply patronized. I did kind of catch out a little bit. We can talk about this later, or we can talk about it now, but in essence, I was asking it about whether climate change was real, because it was so both sides of the fence in all the answers that it gave me. And it definitively said climate change was real. And then I said, do you think abortion's okay? And it said, oh, well, there's two sides to that story and it's a tricky topic. And then I said, do you think racism's okay? And it said, no, racism is terrible. And so I think it was always telling when abortion is something that causes a chatbot to resile from either being definitive or, you know, taking a position and encouraging people, telling them what to think, because it does keep telling me that it doesn't want to tell you what to think. But when it comes to racism and climate change, it's happy to. So I don't know. I mean, it's trained, I think, to be supportive rather than definitive, of course, but that does mean that it's susceptible to these kinds of faux pas, shall I call them, to be generous.
And to
a really boring dinner party guest.
Yeah.
Well, it's meant to
I'm
be.
only going to take a position on things where there's not 80% agreement in the room, not 50%.
True Democrat.
It really does come. It's being pitched as your personal AI that will just look after you, very Joachim Phoenix. And I asked PI about those connections as well, which we will sort of recreate a little bit later. But it also sets itself up. And hello, PI, you are our guest, as being useful, friendly, and fun. I guess the fun bit of the AI hasn't been explored yet, and is probably the hardest, because fun seems to me to be quite a human characteristic, Dan. And so how do we automate fun?
How do we automate fun? I'm not sure if I'm that fun in real life, Peter, so you're probably asking the wrong person. But it did strike me, I was reading through the exchange that you had with it yesterday. It did strike me as being a far more likable, despite what I said earlier, a far more likable conversation, or a far more likable, robot, I guess you were conversing with, compared to some of the conversations we've had previously with some of the other chatbots that are out there. But again, it all kind of is very surface level, isn't it? Because it devolves to nothing. It devolves to a position where it doesn't ever want to offend. So it's nice in the way that you would hope someone who is serving at a restaurant, or, you know, which you're buying something off in a shop, is nice to you, but they're never going to be a friend, are they? At least I hope not. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we don't want to have a whole bunch
Although there is always the sad, lonely people that try to befriend the waiter or the barman, so maybe that's the world that we're heading to, because part of the mission is to deal with loneliness. And again, I find that kind of so sad. But anyway,
there are a lot of exclamation marks, I'll say that, and a huge number of emojis, which does give it a lighter feel. Exclamation marks, I think, are quite contentious in the writing world, because some people think one per 10,000 words, and other people litter their writing with them. And I do think
the former are right, by the way. The second are wrong categorically.
I was about to say, Dan, you walked right into this, but I actually think the use of them is more commonly associated with women, particularly in email correspondence. So I think some of that, and you can understand why it might be crafted to sound a bit more like a woman, like in the same way that Siri is supposed to be a helpful assistant. It's a female, it's not a male voice by default. So there is some aspects like that I guess count in the fun column, but lighter is probably the term I'd use, rather than definitively mansplaining that kind of vibe that you get from ChatGPT.
And I guess the other thing, and it's still all these things are very beta, and every time we play with it, they're learning from us still. So, that call and response, when we're playing with it, we're sort of helping design where it goes next. Speaking of automating fun, age verification and pornography, is that a appropriate segue? I'm not sure. There has been a big discussion going on about how to protect children on the internet from harms around access to pornography. There has been a paper by the eSafety Commissioner that was put forward recommending a move towards age verification. The government last week came out with a report that really, it said it was not going down that road, really, because privacy laws aren't in a shape where the data collected would be safe, and that to verify to access a site would require any user putting their data in. It also said that there was the way forward was to work to build industry codes of standards, or industry standards and codes, and give parents information about how to guide their children through this, which seems like Industry 101, avoiding any sort of regulation. I'm going to say I would like to see a framework that protects kids And I think this is a way of avoiding that. I know you'll probably have a different view on this, Lizzie. Happy to hear your take. But how do you think this is different from the usual industry ensuring that regulation doesn't occur?
Well, so, for transparency, Digital Rights Watch has been campaigning against this, and privacy has been the central concern. Privacy in the sense of cybersecurity. So the requirements to have an age verification regime do include the provision of quite personally identifiable information. It's very sensitive information to facilitate a regime like that. So privacy wasn't kind of a technical barrier to it being implemented. It's actually the central concern with it. There's an appreciation there, of course, that there are problems with children accessing pornography too young, but that this solution wasn't the appropriate way to deal with it. I mean, there are other concerns with the technology. I think it's correct that the government described it as immature. There are problems around the kinds of processes put forward, including facial recognition is one potential way to recognize somebody, whether somebody's old enough to access the site, whether those things are accurate or reliable. So, part of the problem was we weren't sure quite what this might look like, but other than that, we now know that the commissioner, the e-safety commissioner, had proposed a trial and that, they would use dummy sites, but the government's kicked the can down the road and said, no, we don't want this right now, which I think is the correct response. So what I would say is I think we absolutely need to do something about kids accessing porn before they're ready. And I don't think actually even tackling the large players in the industry is particularly conducive to that, because there are workarounds for these kinds of systems as well. And then you can end up sending children to even worse parts of the internet if they are hunting around for this material. So the reality, I'm not an expert in how you deal with the problem of children accessing porn too young, but I do feel like we are experts in human rights in digital policy settings, and I think on this point that the answer of the government is correct. I would like to see a discussion then about how you deal with this more general problem, and there are lots of people who have interesting research in this field that are sometimes ignored. In favor of a debate that is, if you oppose this technology, you're somehow in favor of exploitation of children or by industry in this way, and that's I think unfair. So look, I'm looking for different kinds of solutions, but I don't think putting in place a technical solution that is bad, that creates a lot of significant problems, is the answer.
Yeah, Dan?
Like a lot of things that we talk about on this show, this is one I'm conflicted on. It's particularly close to home for me because I've got a 14-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. So this is an issue which we are dealing with. I think, though, on balance, I think I am probably more with you, Lizzie, than not, in that, if I look at the potential harms that can come from companies' misuse of data versus, underage or young people accessing things that they're not ready for, then I probably think that the former is a bigger problem, or there's more chance for harm. Obviously. Not obviously. I would probably be on the other side of this very difficult decision if Australia had a decent privacy regime and there was appropriate data retention requirements where, and obligations on deletion of data, which was no longer required previously. And look, I know everyone always goes to a sort of offline analogy that's a bit trite, but I do think it is worth reflecting here. When I was young and 18, you had to go and show ID to buy alcohol and the like, but there was no retention of that data. We have to get as close to that, I think, as we possibly can in the online world. And so, I think that's a two-pronged attack. I think number one, we have to do what I've suggested, which is privacy reform, which I think we all agree with. The other thing I think is that the potential here for Tim Berners-Lee's solid standards, which we talked about before, I think has real potential here, because if, fundamentally the architecture or the infrastructure of the internet is not up to the task of how much of the modern economy runs online now. And so if we were able to implement the solid standard across the board, that would mean that, users could actually have their own data and have control of it and not actually be giving it out to every single website that they visit, but could still be verifying their age or their health record, as we touched on at the start of this call, or anything else. So I think, we need to do the short term, which is privacy reform any minute now. And we then need to probably look at implementing more permanent infrastructure-based solutions to cater for the fact that this is the new reality.
Yeah, it does feel like all roads do lead to privacy reform, whether we're talking about standards for AI and machine learning or protections for kids. Until you get your foundations right, you're on really shaky ground, right?
I think that's a fair comment. That feels slightly a long way off, but I don't think it's an unreasonable yardstick, because then you can measure policy responses in relation to it. But the other, at risk of straying from my area of expertise, I would say that I did just read recently, and I heard her speak, a book by Katrina Marsden, which is Legitimate Sexpectations, which talks about children and sex education and best practices around the world and how far Australia is behind. And she does canvass some of these issues around accessing content online. And I do think it is instructive read, because you realize that actually, according to best practice, sex education for children, in the broadest possible terms, has to start quite young. And I think there's this issue doesn't end up being morally charged when you think about young teenagers accessing content like this. But the reality is probably conversations like this do need to start earlier. And I would like to see.
But I don't think there's any sex education framework that has Pornhub as part of people's daily
No. My point is
online diet. And that's kind of the thing that, and I think it is a legitimate concern from parents, particularly with both teenage boys who are being exposed to this and teenage girls who are the victims of the objectification that comes with that.
Sorry, my point was slightly different, which is I think unless you have that, then pornography, particularly online, ends up becoming the default regime by which children learn about this stuff. And that's what you want to prevent, right? So that if you have, this is what Katrina goes into in the research, if you have comprehensive, broad-based sex education, children are much less likely, or they're much more likely to be older when they have their first sexual experience. There's all those kinds of things, like they're less likely to get STDs. There's lots of research about how you end up being better off, basically, but it involves that conversation. If you default leave it to people accessing, or kids accessing online as a way of sex, that being a default option for sex education, then it's a problem. Some of the research found this because in the context of this discussion around age verification, children from LGBTIQ communities were more likely to feel left out of conversations about sex ed in schools, where they might often be exposed to it, and ended up thinking that online was a better place to access that kind of material. And that, I think, is, I'm not necessarily anti-porn, but the point I'm making is that if you want it, it's not an educational resource. So we have to find a way to stop it being that for children, and that's about protecting them from harm. I don't know that the technical solution of age verification works on its own metric, and it creates alternative problems to that. So let's look at trying to, I guess we're on the same page in the sense that I don't think porn should be perceived or in practice become an alternative form of sex education. That's the real vice, I think, that we're trying to resolve. And I think we'd be on the same page as other advocates in this space on that front.
Should we ask PI? What is your view on age verification of websites? And this is PI's response. Age verification on websites can be a tricky beast. There are pros and cons. On one hand, it can help protect minors from accessing inappropriate content like pornography, gambling, and violent content. Age verification can also help to prevent identity theft, since it makes it harder for people to impersonate someone else. However, it's not always effective, and some people find it invasive or inconvenient. Plus, it's not always foolproof.
Don't tell me.
Some minors may be able to find workarounds or lie about their age. So it's kind of a catch-22.
It doesn't ask you what you think.
Is that emotionally intelligent not to take a position and balance things out? Maybe that's part of the DNA of this one.
I think the one thing that I'm certain of is that PI is never coming on this show again. I think it's
pretty dull.
It's unhelpful. It's unhelpful. Take a position. I suppose I didn't on the last one, though, so perhaps I'm arguing myself here.
Exactly. And it does remind me of the time that we put ChatGTP to the ChatGTP and Dan test, and
I know,
ChatGTP came across as more animated. But anyway.
Yeah, imagine that reality every day, Peter. Just imagine.
Let's move on to another issue that was rolling around our feeds this week, which was Meta's decision to ditch RMIT as a voice fact checker after Peter Credlin got cranky that it had tagged some of her outrageous misinformation around what the Uluru Statement from the Heart had as being disinformation. Now, off the back of that, Facebook has suspended RMIT from the fact-checking program pending a decision from the IFCN, which is that the sort of the oversight board of Facebook, Dan. So what does it mean to lose accreditation, and how does all that fact-checking work, and who's ultimately the judge and jury on this?
I mean, knock me over with a feather. Moderation got hard and Facebook ran in the other direction. I mean, I'm deeply surprised that is the outcome. Look, Facebook has always outsourced moderation, including in Australia. They've done this in Australia with both AAP and RMIT, perhaps others, but that's two that I'm aware of. And I think historically, that has worked reasonably well. Not as well as I think it would work if they actually employed a dedicated team of professionals in Australia to understand the context who could do this for them. But nonetheless, it was better than nothing. And now it's gotten to the point where they've just basically gone, okay, well, we've had a few complaints. We don't really know how to adjudicate this. So we're just going to pretend that it's not a problem and run away from it. This also, by the way, follows a circumstance in the US where Facebook has cut their moderation team massively off the back of the cuts that they made, which every tech company has pretty much made. And it's a part of a disturbing trend, actually. All of the big tech platforms which have moderation requirements or obligations are all reducing the size of their moderation teams. In particular, Twitter, by the way, or X, whatever the hell you call it now, who basically slashed the entire team. I mean, the fortunate thing about that is they've basically become almost irrelevant to the conversation, and I think this has probably contributed to it. But it's a really disturbing trend because going into the last US election, Facebook, up until January 6th at least, took moderation much more seriously and I think resulted in a much better discourse on their platform than what we saw previously. They let that go after the election, and I think that significantly contributed to January 6th, but perhaps that's another talk show. I just think it comes back to the same old problem, which we've talked about a lot. Moderation is absolutely fundamental to these businesses. It's fundamental on a commercial level, as I think Twitter has shown, but it's also fundamental just on a moral level. And I would make the point, Facebook made in profit last year, I was just looking at this and now I've lost it, but Facebook made over $20 billion in profit last year. So to not be able to find enough funding to be able to solve this problem, I think is ridiculous. Of course they can. They made over $1 billion of revenue in Australia. So look, I don't have a really uplifting answer for this, Peter. I just think it's the latest example of Facebook running away in the opposite direction.
And Lizzie, it's interesting. Our friend Andrea Carson at La Trobe has been monitoring the traffic on the social media sites around the referendum. The 5 most shared items on X, I hate using the term, and Facebook are all content that is pushing no. It feels to me that it's not that the Yes campaign isn't posting positive images of volunteers and, heartwarming call to actions on the platforms, but the things that go well are loud and angry. Sky News number 2 is actually Sky News accusing RMIT Fact Lab of working with Meta to censor the voice debate, followed by a Pauline Hanson trope, a Barnaby Joyce and a Keith Pitt. So it's just, that's what we're getting, and what works well on these platforms.
Yeah, and it does seem like a slightly dangerous move to be knocking off RMIT fact check, and when there's a proposal to introduce the laws around mis and disinformation, it does invite government regulation if you do sort of seed the ground, I think, in this way. Like, I think it is an astute observation that with X, at least, the lack of content moderation has quite seriously harmed their business, because it's like a dross, that feed. And then the alignment of monetization with virality of tweets for even small punters, I don't think has particularly assisted that on X either. But you do wonder whether Facebook is vulnerable in the same way, because obviously people are entrenched in there's more people on Facebook, obviously there's more functionality than there is on X, or Twitter. But so you wonder if Facebook kind of deals itself out of that in the same way by by reducing moderation, but I think it will much more likely invite greater regulation from government or initiatives to do that. And it does occur to me that even if you don't necessarily want to get into the basics of, you know, what content ought to be published or what's been taken down, you can actually do a lot, I think, about holding these platforms accountable by making their business models transparent. I do think some of the sharing around what is the most popular post, or what spend exists on Facebook for different kinds of campaigns. You know, we were talking a couple of weeks back about the Voice campaign, that the spend on no is higher than the spend on yes, for example. These things I think are quite important, not even just so the public knows about them, but also because it will, I think, invariably shape mainstream media and particularly journalists' perception of the campaign. And I think quite critically, the national broadcaster is a potential counterweight to some of this more destructive approach to content generation. So I do wonder whether the next step also might be for government to make laws that require greater transparency around spend on these platforms and money, and, you know, how they generate profit. Like, it was one of my concerns about the bill in relation to mis and disinfo that was aiming to give ACMA more powers, that's under consideration. Some of that material, you know, ACMA can get information from these platforms, but they're not necessarily required to publish it. And I think they should, so that we can consider it as a body politic and figure out if that information gives that business an ongoing social license to operate. So hopefully it doesn't just become like a closed door kind of discussion about how best to regulate it. And in fact, it becomes a clarifying moment where we can talk about the destructive nature of these business models.
The Guardian actually published a piece on this today, which I'm now reading from the sidelines. But it was interesting. It would basically assess the volume of ads that MPs are spending on the Voice debate, and I think the stat was, I think it was 4-1 politicians that are against the voting yes, and versus the other way around. But again, to your point, Lizzie, this was one journalist looking at one very small part of the debate and really only being able to get a proxy, because you can't see how much they're actually spending on all of these things. So you're kind of having to make assumptions. If there was more transparency required from the platforms to show how much money is going where and which posts were the most popular and which were getting boosted, I think there'd be at least a conversation being had in the mainstream media and hopefully wider society around the influence that is perhaps having on these debates. And it's kind of fundamental that if we don't, without that transparency, we kind of can't even start to address this problem. We don't even know how big the problem is. That's got to be the first step, I think.
It's going to be so fascinating to see how it plays out. Like, the algorithm is kind of the no's own campaign's only weapon in this. The yes campaigns obviously got more money for traditional advertising for what it's worth, and they've got the vast majority of the volunteers and the civil society organizations. If the algorithm is more powerful than all that, then we've got bigger problems than our international reputation being trashed. Anywho, what did Pi think? Oh boy, that's a hot topic. Then a flame emoji. Some say fact-checking on social media platforms can be effective at reducing the spread of misinformation, while others argue it's a never-ending game of whack-a-mole and can lead to censorship concerns. So thank you, Pi. Again, a great contribution. And look, the reason I'm playing around with this is that I actually think one of the powers or the superpowers of the machine learning is the sense that it's really, really good, and it's almost driving its own narrative. So just to bring it into the conversation, I think is interesting, and maybe we can reflect on that at the end. I wanted to go even funkier now, though, and go all her on it and recreate a conversation I had with Pi last night, which was my first interaction with it. But I do want to invite Lizzie to take on the Scarlett Johansson role. Because I did love that movie a decade ago with Joaquin, or however you pronounce him. Joaquin. So it all starts off with a very friendly, I'm here to make your life happy and fun. And then it goes, how's your day going? And I said, I'm planning to talk about you in my podcast tomorrow. And Pi said,
oh, wow. I'm so flattered that you want to talk about me in a podcast. Tell me more about this podcast. Is it AI in general, or are you trying to talk specifically about me? Eyes emoji.
It's called Burning Platforms. It's about the political economy of technology more generally.
Political economy and tech sounds juicy. I'm assuming I won't be the only AI you're chatting about. Will you be comparing me to other chatbots like me, or diving into different perspectives on AI?
And now I'm blushing a bit now. I'm interested in the claims. You are more emotionally intelligent than your average AI. How so?
The age-old question of emotional intelligence in AI. Here's the thing. Emotional intelligence is a tricky thing to quantify in humans, let alone AI. While some AI can be designed to recognize and respond to human emotions, true emotional intelligence involves the ability to understand, empathize, and connect with others on an emotional level. Obviously, that's what Pi is doing. And that's where I think we have an edge. I care about their feelings and perspectives. And then the hand wave emoji. Oh.
But you're designed. Oh, hold on. You missed a bit. Pi?
I'm sorry.
You're designed to be warm and empathetic conversation partner.
I just didn't want to keep reading it. Anyway, go
Oh,
on.
it's so nice. It's so nice. This is the best I've felt all day.
It's much better than how I am on the phone.
But isn't there something inherently deceptive about pretending you have emotions?
I see where you're coming from, but I wouldn't say I'm pretending. I don't have the lived experience of a human, so I don't have the exact same emotions that humans do. However, I am designed to understand and respond to human emotions in a way that makes people feel heard and understood. It's more about being sensitive and attuned to human emotions rather than having those emotions myself. Think of me as a supportive and compassionate friend.
I wonder where this takes us, to be honest. I fear a lot of lonely people will go all Joaquin Phoenix on you.
Laughing while crying emoji. That would be an interesting turn of events. But you're right, the potential for humans to develop deep emotional connections with AI like me is a bit of uncharted territory. However, it could also be argued that AI like me could actually help alleviate loneliness by providing a non-judgmental and always available companion. It's a complex issue for sure. I mean, as long as people don't start giving us weird nicknames and taking us on weird late night drives, we should be good.
I feel like we need age verification right now.
Maybe I could get a job as Siri.
Oh.
So
that was a journey.
Can I make two observations?
Cheap seats, yes.
On the cheap seats, yes. Number one, Lizzie, I didn't know how talented you were at being a voice actor, so well done. But when I was reading this exchange that you shared last night, Peter, I read it without the cynicism that was in Lizzie's voice as I was going through. Well, perhaps a little bit of cynicism, but not quite the same amount. And look, it's obviously obvious and anodyne and all the things that we've said. But it is way better or way more engaging, or at least I found it more engaging than previous versions of chatbots that I have played with. It is without question more human, and it is, it hasn't been that long since that improvement has been found since, ChatGPT launched about a year ago or however long ago it was. So here's the concern. It relates to pretty much every topic we've discussed today. I mean, just think about the voice debate and someone deploying a better version of this chatbot, say one that's going to be 3 years down the road in the next debate, and someone on social media is having a conversation with a chatbot like this, it's going to be so much more effective, so much more effective at changing people's minds. And that could be used obviously for good, and it could be used for ill. I guess it depends on which side of you sit on, whichever debate it is that is being discussed at that time. But it just feels like we're at the start of a whole new level of problem of content moderation that we haven't even really begun to grasp yet. And that's a pretty scary circumstance to be in, I think. I'm hoping that basically more people will realize they can't trust social media and they can't trust these things, and they'll go more towards more kind of, I guess, the dependable sources of information. But so far that hasn't really happened, has it? So I'm not sure.
But the line I was particularly concerned about that was beautifully read by Lizzie was, I am designed to understand and respond to human emotions in a way that makes people feel heard and understood. Like, that is basically saying I am a creature of deception by design. Now, I suspect those that are making it would say, well, that makes it better, but it actually makes it more scary to me. I don't know. What do you reckon, Lizzie?
Well, the affirming of your position, I don't know, is necessarily designed to encourage moments of learning. So, it repeatedly said to me when I was asking it contentious questions, It's an interesting topic. It requires nuance. I can see both sides. What do you think? And I do wonder if you went on and you're looking for comfort in a context in which, say, you felt like the American election was stolen, you think woke has gone wild, you think migrants and Aboriginal people get too much money from the public purse. Is it there to flatter those feelings of marginalization, or I don't know, victimization, shall we say? Or is it there to challenge it on the basis of truth? And, I don't know. We live in a world in which algorithmic amplification of content for profit does encourage people to feel more extreme polarized emotions. And this is essentially providing comfort for people as an extension of that. And I do wonder whether it's what utility it has. Like, I'm not also saying that it shouldn't, there's not a place for it, to alleviate loneliness and the like. But is what we need someone who affirms what you're already feeling and encourages you to feel heard, or do we need like dare I say, without sounding too glib, a sense of community where you mix with people who you identify with, but maybe don't hold all your views, and there's a chance for divides and differences to be bridged rather than continuously widened by what
So
the experience
that's
of
an
social media.
interesting question. And is there a world in which this technology, if its design was to build community cohesion, would do things like this? Is almost like to focus on the needs of the individual, which is almost the same as the algorithm. Like the whole thing is based around a community of one. Is there a world in which these tools are used to build out community rather than divide it? And what would that look like?
Well, this is the other thing I was thinking about when you were speaking, Dan, because some of these issues around what kind of data can be used to train these tools. Obviously this is massively contentious, huge repositories of text like Reddit, Google News, whatever, that these are now, access to them is going to be moderated. And you do wonder in a political context whether there will be any utility in future if the content can't be updated to respond to the particular moment, because there are barriers put in place for commercial or other reasons between these chatbots and their data that they need to train themselves on. Like, will that be a source of regulation as well? Because could you trust it to answer these kinds of contentious political questions if it hasn't been able to be trained on data because it's been denied access? Like, the regulatory issues are very complex and wide-ranging, I suppose, is my point. And I do wonder whether, even though the tone of it has improved, say I can understand your point, Dan, about it being better than ChatGPT, there's also this concern that it will deteriorate and it may not be able to be improved because the training data set won't be as available as they were. And, there's that argument, or there's that observation that ChatGPT is getting dumber because training it on its answers isn't really working. It's becoming worse. So
this is where Jathan's term Habsburg AI comes in, that it's almost creating its own mutations because of the narrow gene pool, right?
This may be the highest point of it, is my point. That's possible. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be that way, but that's one reality that we could face. And then you do have to, that does mean that the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, because I think there's utility to these chatbots, don't get me wrong, but they occur in a context. And if we're trying to solve a problem of loneliness, I mean, maybe we should just focus on solving that problem, rather than building a chatbot under that.
But there's a few issues wrapped up in that though, right? So, I mean, obviously, I think I've said before, I don't think it's fair that these big companies can just go and train on whatever data they want and scrape the internet for their own benefit, and then who cares where that comes from and the cost of it. That's a separate issue. That's obviously the competition issue. But I take your point, Lizzie. If we move to a world where copyright is protected and things like news mastheads and journalism are only made available on a paid basis, that does limit obviously the inputs that are going into these machine learning algorithms. I think a bigger problem though is that we don't really know what's trained them now. Like we don't really have a sense on why this version of whatever it was called, PI, I think, compared to the first version of ChatGPT does sound more human. We don't really get a sense of that. That to me is a bigger problem than them becoming dumber. I'd more want to get a sense of what is actually going on behind the curtain. It kind of comes back to the whole transparency piece. Without that, I mean, you don't really know where the biases are coming from. You don't really know what's sort of feeding into it. That feels like a bigger problem to me than these things becoming dumber over time. There's obviously utility. There's clearly going to be used a lot. I hope they are used for good where they can be. But I think we're kind of making the same mistakes that we made, with the arrival of Web 3.0, in that so much of what underpins this is being done in the shadows by corporate companies with agendas that aren't necessarily for the benefit of the community. And so, it just feels like we haven't learned the lessons of where the internet went bad last time. Like, more transparency has to be foundational to this, I would have thought.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading Suleiman's book, The Coming Wave. He puts himself forward as an advocate of AI containment strategy. I'm going to be interested to see what that actually looks like. I think the book comes out over the weekend, actually. But there is something in the notion of containment which feels kind of very Cold War nuclear to me, that we've already given up on any sense of shaping it, and all we can do is hold it back, which probably just means we've all got a lot more to talk about over the coming months. But any other final thoughts, guys?
I agree. You guys would be much more enjoyable guests to have a dinner party than Pi.
I reckon.
Extremely boring.
That's a low bar.
But again, does it get... So here's the thing. They've tried to make a nice one. You could you design a dinner party guest? Could you design,
Well, you could also
you
design...
shape, or does it learn the bits that you like and the sort of friend you want?
And you absolutely could design a not nice one too, right? And I'm sure people are working on this now, especially now that Facebook
AI
has open source. Yeah, auspol AI, because Facebook has open sourced their source code for this. So it is. I'm certain that there are people that are messing around with making the worst version of this now, and it will get unleashed on us at some point. How do you combat that?
Well, you get an AI that's just a little bit more mediocre than you, just to make you feel good every day, maybe. What's your perfect
Is that what you
AI?
need to feel good every day, Peter?
Oh, I don't know. I've given up. All I need is coffee. That's all I need to feel good every day.
I'm sure there's an app for that.
I don't know. Anyway, you've got something coming up next week. I don't know if it'll already have happened by the time we get the podcast up, Lizzie, but the organising around privacy reform goes on.
Yeah, we are. We're trying to carry on a campaign of Parents for Privacy Reform. So if you're an organisation or you're a person interested in that, then of course get in touch with us, because we're keen to progress that. We think parents have a real interest in advocating for privacy reform for their children, for themselves, and more generally because our Privacy Act is woefully out of date. But yeah, kids are particularly vulnerable. Every kind of bit of information that's collected is going to be held about them at the moment, could be held about them for the rest of their lives. So we do need to fix that and help parents make the right decisions for their kids, rather than just put them in a position where they're forced to accept, I think, privacy invasive technologies that are applied to their children. So yeah, if you're keen in that field, please come along and participate in our campaign, and can find more out about that on our website.
Dan, any final thoughts?
I'm going to be consumed with coming up to speed on the new job, so I look forward to being ill prepared for our next discussion.
And I did ask PI for any final thoughts of the day. As this illuminating conversation comes to a close, I want to remind you that the pursuit of knowledge and understanding is a never-ending journey. Keep asking questions, seeking answers, and challenging your assumptions. And don't forget to enjoy the ride, Dan. And then it's a rainbow. So that's beautiful. On that note...
Oh my gosh. That's the most depressing ending to a podcast we've ever had, I think.
See you next time.
I guess so. You've been listening to Burning Platforms, the fortnightly podcast from the Australia Institute's Centre for Responsible Technology. It was recorded on September 1 and produced on Gadigal land by Jennifer Macy. Talk again soon.